longevity lifestyle designers. This is GovernYourSecretsOfLongevity.com. As you can see from the question that's going to come up on the screen here, I was asked what are my methods or my recommendations for preparing meat, whether it's raw or cooked. And the reality of the answer is going to be much more complex than a black or white solution. So as you probably know, I've been a proponent of certain types of foods being consumed raw for a long time. I've also much more in the last few years talked about the importance of cooked food. And if you've heard me really go in depth in this, you know instead of using the term cooked, I prefer the term processed. So that means that whatever it is we're eating, ideally it needs to be prepared in some way, whether it is raw or cooked. A lot of the ways we eat raw foods is we prepare them in some way, from fermenting them, blending them, juicing them, marinating them, much in the way that you marinate a salad and dressing, which helps extract a lot of the nutrients from the greens, which are otherwise proven by science less likely to be absorbed in as great a quantity as is optimal. And then there's also things like dehydrating. So these are all ways that we access the nutrients within foods, and in some cases also make them safer to consume. And it largely applies to meat as well. So I'm not all for doing things one single way all the time. If you were just listen to the absolute pinnacle of science, it would have you believe that you should boil all your meat. And the only way I'm going to eat boiled meat is from boiled bone broth. Really emphasizing the alliteration there. But yeah, I mean, soups are great. Have meat in your soup. That's one way to consume it. The really fine details of, is a flash fried steak versus beef soup. Is the soup going to be healthier? It's really not that big of a difference. And in some cases, you can overcook a soup, and even though it's not at high temperature, because of the length and time that's cooked for, it's actually developed a lot more of these problematic compounds that we hear talked about that do have a bit of a carcinogenic effect in their accumulative long-term consumption. So that's why you don't want to eat charred meat every single day. That's also why you don't want to eat cured meats, even if it's part of your family's historical ancestral tradition, every day for your life. But consuming these once in a while is not a big detriment in any way, shape, or form. I'd say the same thing for roast meat. That is something that I think a lot of people overlook, is that sustained long-term medium to high temperature cooking, or even low to medium temperature cooking, creates more free radical damage than very hot short-term cooking. So when you do a rare steak or even medium rare steak on a skillet, a lot of people criticize that because they associate the media's use of the term frying to mean that, when in actual fact it's referring to deep frying. But yeah, it's not unhealthy to fry a steak like that. When you compare it to a roast dinner, which has been sitting in the oven for 2+ hours, where you get that browning on the outside edge of the skin, it's cooked all the way through, and there's a lot more denaturing of both the proteins and some of the fats within them. And that's what really sets up some of the problems down the road, is when you consume that on a long-term basis. Coming from a European family background, that is definitely a mainstay in not daily meat consumption in my family's history, but more than once a week. There's the Sunday roast dinner, there's 1 or 2 roasts through the week to be added to sandwiches and things like that. And I'm not saying never eat that, but that shouldn't be the norm, in my opinion, for long-term health. You want to have an array of ways that you eat things just to keep life interesting, but consider having stuff slightly on the less cooked side when you're talking about beef, especially, unless you're talking about ground meat. That is the one type of meat I'd say always needs to be cooked all the way through, is ground meat, of course. But you look at the longest lived cultures, they have various types of raw food animal products in their diets in small quantities. Whether it's in Japan, they have sushi or sashimi. Many parts of the world, they consumed raw dairy. Even if it was turned into cheese or yogurt, it's still very much raw. They weren't having to pasteurize it back then, and they had much healthier animals. So it was extremely unlikely for any pathogens to be passed down. And by fermenting these animal foods, they're kept raw, but they're fermented, you promote the good bacteria that turns it into something that's edible once it's fermented, and that actually crowds out any potential bad bacteria that might be present within that food product. And you look at any part of any ancient culture, and Weston A. Price discovered this and pointed it out, that they always have some type of raw animal food, whether it's simply just eating a bit of the liver on fresh kills in the wild. They'd go in, eat the liver immediately, take the rest of the animal back to their encampment and cook the rest of it up. You're getting some raw animal foods and getting some of those nutrients that are destroyed in the cooking process. But again, cooking drastically increases the availability and absorbability of many compounds, ranging from proteins to some of the vitamins and minerals. So it is a balancing act. You have to have a bit of everything, in my opinion, and not be too dogmatic, not be relying on some of the more extreme forms of cooking. I'd say, except for on the odd occasion that you might be out at a restaurant and just feel like you want to eat something like this, I'd stay away from deep fried animal foods, meat, because you're getting a coating of vegetable oils that have been deep fried. If they still deep fried things in lard and beef suet, that would be a different story. That's the way things used to be, and it was much healthier because there's a lot less of the volatile polyunsaturated fats within animal foods, which get highly denatured and are highly damaging to the body when they've been cooked at a high temperature, as they are in deep frying. So things like fish and chips, or pork crackling, or any other meat or animal food that's deep fried is highly questionable as something that you want to be consuming with any regularity, except for on the odd occasion if you really want to treat your palate. But once you're healthier, you tend to not have cravings for these things. If you are having cravings for something deep fried like that, you're probably just not getting enough fat in your day-to-day diet anyways, or maybe not enough salt, or whatever it is you're craving. So is it any surprise to you that, just like you see in many of my videos on diet, that my recommendations are very open-ended, but they're also cautionary against getting stuck in one rigid way of doing things, even if it is thinking that, oh, if soup's the best way to consume meat, I'm going to only ever consume meat in that way. I think that's just as limiting and sets yourself up for failure. Unless you just really like soup and eating it that way, then by all means do that, but it's by no means the most drastic thing that's going to affect your health. I mean, this is another interesting point. People think in terms of stir fries, that's a very Asian method of cooking. It's basically just a frying pan with a curve to it. And so people think, oh, stir-fried vegetables with chicken in it is healthy, but, you know, chicken fried in a skillet, a flat frying pan, is somehow bad. It's just a different shape to the cooking utensil. It's still a very hot heat that's direct. It's short-term cooking, and it's healthy either way. When you douse on the vegetable oils and you're frying that and the vegetable oils are getting denatured, that's when you run into problems. So we have to look at these things with a critical eye. We have to understand that we want diversity in our diets, and then you conform what you do according to that. And for quantity of meat that you consume, that is always, once again, open to what works for you. If you haven't seen my recent video on what I think the best diet in the world is, I highly recommend you check it out. I'll link to it below. And that's just saying you have to figure out where on the range of high meat to low to next to no meat you fall on the scale of what works ideally for you. So let me know what you think about this video in the comments below. Leave a question if it's pertinent to this channel. I'll answer it in a future Q&A. And like, favorite, and share the video if you feel so inclined. So with that, I'll talk to you next time. Take care and embrace life without limits.